Hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Key Mind and Sociology podcast. I wish you a nice and enjoyable weekend. In today's episode, we will focus on Émile Durkheim, one of the founding figures of sociology. As Durkheim mentioned, society is more than the sum of individuals. This powerful statement reminds us how social structures can exist independently of the individual. But what does this mean? How can one make sense of society? If we ask who Durkheim is, let's take a brief look at his life. He was born in France in 1858, and he started his education in philosophy. For sure, there was no such department as sociology at that time, so he started his career as a philosophy teacher. He started teaching in about 1882, and a few years later, in 1885, he went to Germany to do research. This period in Germany reinforced his interest in the social sciences. Later in 1887, he was appointed to the University of Bordeaux, where he began to teach social science and pedagogy. The foundations of sociology as we know it were laid right here in this period. In the same year, he married Louise, and they had 2 children, but we don't have much information about his life. Durkheim's real fame came with his work, The Division of Labor in Society, published in 1893. Then with the rules of the sociological method, he made his voice even louder, and his work, The Primitive Forms of Religious Life and Suicide, which is one of my favorite, was an important stop on his academic journey. Durkheim lived at a time when world history was changing rapidly. The end of the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, with the impact of the Industrial Revolution, people were migrating from villages to cities and social structures were being turned upside down. Political crises were taking place in France, imperialism was on the rise in Europe, and science and positivism were experiencing their golden age. It was precisely in this chaos that Durkheim tried to understand society scientifically, as individuals were becoming isolated. While individuals were getting lonelier and the traditional ties were dissolving, he pursued the question, what holds society together? At the center of Durkheim's thought are 2 important points. First, the social is superior to the individual, and second, society is a subject that can be studied scientifically. With these 2 basic perspectives, he focuses on 3 subjects in particular: morality, religion, and law. Of this, he gives the most importance to morality, with law slightly behind. But why is the law important anyway? For sociology, law is a powerful clue to understanding how society is shaped and how it changes over time. What we call law is a set of rules that show which behaviors society considers right and which it considers wrong. And these rules are determined not only by written laws, but also by customs, traditions, and moral values. According to Durkheim, law and morality are not very different from each other. He sees them as a whole. So what we call good or positive behavior is that which is by the moral rules of society, and bad or negative behavior is violating these rules, and society sanctions those who break these rules in some way, sometimes through criminal law, sometimes simply through social pressure. One of Durkheim's most striking claims is that society itself is a moral structure. Morality is the most fundamental condition for a society to exist. The ability of people to share common values, to trust each other, and to maintain social order all rely on moral bonds. Social facts have 3 basic characteristics. First, they're external to the individual. That is, we find them ready, made when we are born, just like rules, belief systems, and traditions. Second, they have the power of coercion over us. This means that society can punish us in various ways if we don't follow these rules. For example, religion or the legal system tells us what is acceptable and what is wrong. Thirdly, social phenomena are autonomous. That is, they're independent of the will of individuals and can be explained only by other social phenomena. What Durkheim is emphasizing here is that to understand society, we should start not from the individual, but from the relations between social structures. This is one of the most important points that distinguish sociology from psychology. Durkheim also closely examined the changes in the social structure over time. He especially focused on the transition from traditionalism to individualism and explained this process as a transition of society from mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity. While mechanical solidarity is a bond between similar individuals based on shared beliefs and values, organic solidarity is based on the interdependence of individuals in modern societies where differentiated roles and division of labor increase. In other words, according to Durkheim, as modern societies diversify, interdependence between individuals is formed through these differences. According to Durkheim, collective consciousness is a set of common beliefs, values, norms, and emotions shared by individuals in a society. In other words, we can say that it's like the common mind or the common spirit that holds a society together. As I've just mentioned, Durkheim in his work on society deals with it both from the point of view of the individual and from a structural point of view. I think the most striking example here is his work Suicide. I have to say from my perspective that it was one of the most impressive books I read as a sociology student. So in this work, Durkheim tries to show how the phenomenon of suicide, which seems to be individual, is linked to social factors. Because think about it. At first glance, a person talking their own life seems to be a purely personal decision, but he claims, no, this is a reflection of society. He tries to prove this with the data he has, and in fact, he shows the power of sociology with this analysis. So, why do you think people commit suicide? Which situations bring people with different lives to the same point? Or what is a social bond that unites individuals who feel lonely and without a way out? Perhaps you would like to think about this now. So, according to Durkheim, suicides are divided into four main categories. First, egoistic suicide. It's seen in individuals who have weak ties with society and do not feel a sense of belonging. Second, altruistic suicide. Self-sacrifice by individuals whose ties to society are too strong. Third, anomic suicide. I will talk about it. So it occurs in periods when social order is disrupted and norms collapse. And fatalistic suicide, the result of a life full of excessive pressure and rules with no escape. And another important point Durkheim pointed out in suicide is the unifying effect of religion on the individual. Yes, Durkheim saw religion not only as a belief system, but also a social structure. And also his research shows that religious faith helps to create a stronger bond between the individual and the society. And this bond reduces the individual's feeling of loneliness. Therefore, he emphasizes that suicide rates are lower in religious societies. So it's not a question of believing in God or not. No. The issue is whether the individual feels part of a group. Religion creates a space of collective consequences and protects the individual from loneliness and meaninglessness. So one of the types of suicide that Durkheim, as I mentioned, was most interested, it was anomic suicide. So basically, from his perspective, anomie, a state of normlessness, is a condition that results from the individual's breaking the social order in which he or she lives. In other words, the individual no longer knows what is right or wrong, and this state of uncertainty shakes the order in the individual's life and brings with an intense sense of suffering. And there is an interesting point in Durkheim's work. According to statistics, suicide rates increase not only in time of economic crisis, but also in times of extreme growth in prosperity. This shows us that the issue is not only poverty. The real issue is the shaking of the social order, the sudden pushing of the individual out of the rules to which he or she is accustomed. Another example is sudden changes in an individual's social status. For example, the sudden end of a marriage or the loss of one of the spouses. Such events upset the order to which the individual is accustomed. And the individual who has difficulty adapting to the new circumstances may be left with a feeling of emptiness. So today, the digital world, from my perspective, is perhaps the place where anomie is experienced most intensely. Of social media algorithms, ritual norms, digital culture seems to determine what is normal, what is successful, and what is right. And as the individual tries to keep up with these norms, they become more alienated. This further expands the boundaries of anomie in modern society. I think if Durkheim had lived, maybe he would have given an example from social platforms. Who knows that? But we can say this. Anomie is not just a bookish concept. It's exactly the mood of the digital age we're living in. And his concept of anomie and Karl Marx's idea of alienation are often mistaken. However, although these two concepts seem to have a common ground through the criticism of modern society, they actually touch very different places. So with anomie, Durkheim pointed to a state of emptiness in which the individual is deprived of norms and roles. Marx, on the other hand, when speaking of alienation, is more critical of the economic system, namely capitalism, which in the process of labor separates people from their production, from their labor, and even from their nature. The worker becomes alienated from what it is that he has produced, and alienated from the production process, and eventually alienated from the worker himself. This is a critique of structural exploitation itself. So to summarize, anomie, disillusion of norms, disorientation of the individual within the social order, and the alienation of the capitalist production system from oneself and one's labor. So yes, in today's episode, we talked about how Émile Durkheim tried to understand society and how the bond between the individual and society was shaped. And next week, we will move on to another sociological giant, Max Weber. We will try to understand the spirit of modern capitalism through authority, rationalization, and for sure, bureaucracy. Until next episode.